I fondly remember the first time I saw the classic film Dead Poets Society. I was just a kid. My favorite uncle rented it for my little brother and me and insisted that we watch it. My little brother and I were none too thrilled about this idea of watching a movie about a bunch of dudes reciting poetry together. But we trusted my uncle and his impeccable taste in movies, having watched dozens with him before. So we gave it a whirl. Well, if you've seen the film, you know we were not disappointed. In the movie, the late Robin Williams played an unorthodox prep school teacher who invited his students to see the world from a novel vantage point, to get a new perspective by climbing up on top of his teacher's desk and having a look around. 7 years ago this month, I experienced a similar paradigm shift in my own life when I entered psychotherapy for the first time, not as a therapist, but as a patient. With one important difference from the young men in the movie, instead of looking down from a position of prominence, I found myself in the vulnerable spot, looking up, lying on the couch. I wondered, would the therapist believe, would he believe me? Would he believe my side of the story, what I had just gone through? Would it be more about giving me a diagnosis and fixing something wrong with me? I mean, looking back, what a stigma I was holding, a therapist myself. Despite reassuring my patients that seeking therapy is legitimate for any reason, when I did so myself, I was thinking, what's the matter with me that as a therapist, I need therapy? So the therapist is listening closely as I'm assuring him of my sanity, telling him I'm not seeking treatment because I'm crazy or anything. I've just gone through this horrible betrayal, and I can't wrap my head around it. And he's just listening. I explained, hey, I'm a shrink myself. I just can't do the job this time, you know. I'm practically apologizing for giving him my business. More listening. Silent, but he's right there, totally tracking with me, ready for me to go ahead and just lay it out there. So I go for it. I tell him about this favorite uncle. Tell him about the tightness of our family, immediate and extended, as I'm growing up. And then I told him about how several years prior to this, our first session, my grandfather had passed away, and my grandmother survived him, and how she had sold their farm in the Midwest for millions of dollars. She sold it for millions because they were building a shopping mall. It had never been worth a whole lot when I was growing up. And she immediately, and I told the therapist how she immediately promised a really generous inheritance to my brother, to me, to my parents, to my cousins, to my aunt and uncle. And I told the therapist how relieved I felt early in grad school after Grandpa had died and Grandma had made that promise, and she'd even begun gifting small portions to us, about this relief that I would have when all my graduate schooling was finished and it was time to climb out of student debt, and I'd have a little cushion. Then I told the therapist what brought me in. Just 2 weeks prior to that session, my grandmother had died, and that was awful in its own right, but it was expected. What brought me into therapy was discovering after her death that during her ailing final years, when my uncle moved her into his home to care for her, he had apparently also done a very good job of convincing her to leave him every penny of the family inheritance. So along with my family of origin, I had just been disinherited. I was about to ask the therapist my first question. How can I really trust anyone again? When the therapist, who looked pained and impacted for me, but certainly not rattled, finally spoke. He had a question or two for me first. Hey, how had your uncle acted while you were growing up? Was he always pretty reliable, trustworthy? Oh, yeah, of course, I answered immediately. Our families were like this. He and my dad were like best friends. His family lived like 6 blocks from ours. During my high school years, we were over there after school every day, or vice versa. As far as an extended family relationship, it was the best that I could possibly ask for. As far as how he had acted, I guess there were always little things that seemed a little funny, like if we ever went shopping for golf equipment or something, he would try to lowball the sales associate and get them to throw in something free with his purchase. But that was just being a good negotiator, right? And then there was this one time he took me to one of my first college football games. I was like 7. We were on a road trip, just he and I in the car, and we had a contest to see who could hold their breath longer. And he cheated to beat me. But, that was just him being a goofy uncle. That didn't make him shady, right? My therapist's reply surprised me. Oh, so there was stuff. Your uncle had a history of cheating and manipulation. But you ignored it. Excuse me? I ignored it? Granted, I wasn't feeling diagnosed, wasn't feeling crazy, wasn't feeling judged. He wasn't doubting my story, but I was being inaccurately quoted here. And this is early into the first session. I come in with a question about trust, and I'm already wondering, can I trust this guy? Maybe he hadn't been listening so carefully during those silences. I knew I could get my point across if he just gave me another chance. Well, he was still listening silently, so I took my opportunity to re-explain. No, you don't get it, I said. See, my dad and my uncle, they were like best friends. Our families were like best friends, In fact, whenever my uncle did stuff like that, I was always able to find a reason for it. My therapist nodded. Thank you. My therapist nodded with a subtle smile. Yeah. You ignored it. Yup. Gulp. He was right. I had totally ignored it. An altogether new question begged my attention. Where the hell was I? Because I'm telling you, I was not lying on that couch. I had experienced something transcendent. I had been catapulted. Was this the new view from atop the proverbial teacher's desk? Yeah, I think so. And this desk was high above it all, high above the fray, up where things make sense because you can finally see how they all fit together. This is insight, the aha moment, the place that suddenly clicks. See, in that moment, all the power I had lost as a result of the betrayal came rushing back to me because my therapist's gentle confrontation didn't dismiss the facts. It totally acknowledged those, but it illuminated the deeper truth that I was, and I always had been, the arbiter of whom I trust and how deeply I choose to trust them. Now, to me, that meant I was no longer the passive victim. I was the credulous nephew who had wanted to see the best in his uncle, even if doing so meant ignoring the worst. Seeing the best in others is a hopeful, optimistic trait, one that I use every day in my profession, but it had totally created a blind spot with my uncle. I think I was most shocked by how this moment transformed my question about trust. The initial question, how can I really trust anyone again? I never even had the opportunity to ask. It immediately shifted over to, hey, how do I really start trusting myself? How does life change when that happens? What other kinds of worst things had I been ignoring about people close to me just to maintain their innocence? What things had I ignored about myself? What about my darker side? So after that moment, I could have quit therapy right then. I would have been fine. It was like so healing. But therapy was too good to quit. And so 7 years later, I'm still in. And I'm in not because I'm crazy, and I'm in not to get a diagnosis, but I'm in because lying on the couch catapults me on top of the desk. It's how I get perspective. It's how I lay claim to the true inheritance that my grandparents provided even before their death. Meaning, self-awareness, understanding, comprehension, faith, purpose. So going to therapy never made me feel crazy or judged, as I once feared. In fact, at this point, I think I'd be crazy to quit. Thank you all so much.